Hello everyone, I'm Sean Oates, and welcome to my presentation on the monograph American by Paper, How Documents Matter in Immigrant Literacy by Kate Vieira. Papers and literacy govern our everyday lives, and this is something that many Americans often take for granted. However, as Vieira explores in this book, the power of documents and literacy is something that many immigrants to the United States are acutely aware of. Vieira, who teaches writing, composition, and rhetoric at the University of Wisconsin, does this by conducting an ethnographic study of two communities of Portuguese-speaking immigrants, one Brazilian and one Azorian, in South Mills, a pseudonym that she gives to a post-industrial town in Massachusetts. Vieira interviewed scores of documented and undocumented migrants between 2008 and 2010 and found that papers were a prominent concern for these people. Here, Vieira defines papers as, quote, textual objects, artifacts, and technologies that link migrants to larger institutions, such as the state, the school, and the workplace, and that allow them to move up, to move around, and to get by. These can be things such as passports, green cards, diplomas, driver's licenses, etc. Across 4 chapters, Vieira attempts to discover what migrants' interactions with papers reveals about the nature of their literacy. The theoretical underpinning of this book is the idea that literacy is integral to social mobility, civic participation, and assimilation into the broader culture for migrants. Additionally, Vieira sets out to develop a socio-material theory of literacy that brings together the opposing literacy theories of strong text and new literacy studies, in which the former emphasizes the power of literary products as technologies that can transcend time, space, and their social contexts, while the latter focuses on reading and writing as a practice married to the social context of writers and readers. The evidentiary basis for this socio-material theory of literacy include the aforementioned scores of interviews Vieira conducted with documented and undocumented immigrants in South Mills, as well as several writing samples produced by these immigrants that she managed to procure. In Chapter 1, Vieira compares the Brazilians' and Azorians' literacies and experiences with papers. Contrary to traditional views of migrant literacy as a means of assimilation, Vieira found that, quote, literacy appeared to lead to assimilation insofar as it promised to ease migrants' access to powerful national bureaucracies that regulated mobility. In general, she found that Brazilian migrants tended to possess excellent literacy but lacked necessary paperwork to enjoy legal status in the United States, while Azorians possessed the necessary paperwork to validate their identity as Americans, but their poor literacy threatened their social mobility. Both communities, however, viewed papers as a symbol of, quote, heightened social power, symbolizing the social status promising the mobility that was otherwise threatened by stigmatized language and literary practices. In Chapter 2, Vieira examines how the writing of transnational letters began as a way of keeping Azorian immigrants in touch with their families back home, and how these letters eventually became subsumed by the state as a sort of migrant recruiting tool. Thus, many migrants came to view literacy as a means to comply with the larger paper issuing institutions, such as the government. In Chapter 3, Vieira details how transnational churches provided undocumented Brazilians with communal support as they lived with the anxiety of their undocumented status, leading them to pursue and produce church papers instead of state papers. Vieira also establishes a link between migrants' religious activities and their documentary status. Vieira found that, quote, undocumented people drew on their literacy resources to engage not with the state, which excluded them, but with the church, which scaffolded their literary efforts. Religious writing also offered the undocumented a sense of protection and belonging, and participating in transnational churches' literacy events stimulated the kind of cross-border mobility that was otherwise prohibited. Finally, in Chapter 4, Vieira explores the lives of young people from both communities and how their lack of papers and/or literacy threatened their social and physical mobility by making it difficult to get a good education or important documents such as driver's licenses. Interestingly, Vieira found that Azorian Americans, despite being disappointed that papers alone did not propel them upward socially, still believed in the promise of papers, quote, speaking to how forcefully the institutional histories of papers infused their lived experiences. In her conclusion, Vieira argues that a socio-material theory of literacy, such as the one she presents in this book, has implications for legislations that could impact migrants' literacy development. It can also shift conversations away from suppositions of language assimilation as the end-all goal of literacy toward other goals, such as accessing the literacy and papers that open up transnational educational trajectories, and even allow for researchers to track the development of literacy technologies and how they can affect transnational literacy development. American by Paper seems to have been very positively received in the academic community. Writing in social and behavioral sciences, T.J. Vicino calls the book, quote, a valuable study that demonstrates how the interdisciplinary nature of the study of migration and globalization can be examined in humanistic ways. McConaughey praises the book for the depth of its research and notes the potential that a socio-material theory of literacy has for influencing various institutional policies that can affect migrant literacy development, although she expresses concern that the, quote, broad conceptualization of papers presented in the book runs the risk of facilitating overgeneralizations about the relationship between migrants' literacy and papers. And Mary Caldera believes the book to be an incredibly valuable resource to archivists, especially those disappointed with the lack of diversity in the U.S. archival record, and that focusing on how important papers and literacy are to the lives of migrants emphasizes their importance in the lives of all Americans. And thank you all so much for watching this presentation, and I hope that the rest of the semester treats you well. Thanks, and have a good one.